Palestinians' permanent observer to the United Nations calls for immediate action for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli forces advanced 9 kilometers deep into the countryside of Daraa in southern Syria. And Russia says it can work with the administration of US President Donald Trump after he is sworn in as the United States President next month. It's almost 8 p.m. local time and you're watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Palestinians' permanent observer to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, has called for an immediate action for a ceasefire in Gaza. Mansour said that Israel continues to violate international law on occupied territories. He also added that Israel continues to forcibly mass displace Palestinians.
In this century. Over a year ago, and from this,
Egyptian President Sisi and President of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto, have discussed developments in Gaza, Syria and Lebanon, reaffirming the importance of continuing efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. Addressing the media in a joint press conference, President Sisi said Egypt was the first country to recognize Indonesia and establish diplomatic relations. He also emphasized the importance of coordinating positions on mutual issues between both countries. Meanwhile, Indonesia's president has said that Indonesia appreciates Egypt's strategic role efforts in delivering aid to Gaza. The United Nations has said a ceasefire in Gaza is long overdue. Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mohammed Khalid, has said the continued collective punishment of the Palestinian people is unjustified. He had added that the relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces is horrific.
And deprivation resulting from Israel's military operations in North Gaza.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has arrived in Cairo to participate in the 11th edition of the D8 Summit of the Organization of Islamic Countries for Economic Cooperation. Abbas is set to deliver 2 speeches during the summit, starting tomorrow, the first during the opening session and the second during a session dedicated to the latest development in Palestine and Lebanon. Israeli forces have closed the entrance to the village of Marda, north of Selfit in the West Bank. Sources said that Israeli soldiers blocked the western and only entrance to the village and fired live ammunition at residents who attempted to enter or exit the area. The eastern entrance to the village has been closed by Israeli forces with an iron gate from several months. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has called the potential ceasefire detainee deal a serious error. Speaking to Israeli media, Smotrich said that this is not the time to give Hamas a lifeline. He added that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu knows what Israel's red lines are and that his religious Zionism party has significant influence over the government's decisions. And for more analysis, we now move on to Salma Al-Fay in our newsroom. Salma?
Thank you, Rana. And for further analysis on the current situation in Gaza, we're joined from Ramallah by Dr. Tamara Haddad, writer and political researcher. Welcome, Dr. Haddad. And let me start off by asking you, what are the key reasons behind Smotrich's belief that pursuing a peace deal with Hamas would be a serious mistake? And how does he argue that military action is a more effective solution in the current context?
Greetings, everybody, and to your channel and your viewers. In fact, the stance of Smotrich is not something new. He always believes that signing a peace agreement with Hamas is a major mistake, and he always, for that matter, attempts over and over again to exclude the potentiality for a peace agreement with Hamas, and he always thinks that it is more viable to operationalize the military solutions. In fact, it's very obvious that he doesn't want to get the Israeli settlers outside of the Gaza Strip. And in fact, there is a veto backing up the practices of Smotrich. And there are other parties inside of the extremist coalition government that are actually backing up his stances as well. Smotrich over and over again that he doesn't want to or that he considers the Israeli prisoners of the hostages. He doesn't want to release the hostages because they are convicted of murdering Israelis. And so the proposition of releasing Palestinians has to do more with the release of them outside of the Palestinian territories. And in addition to that, there is a veto backing up what Netanyahu is doing. Netanyahu, in fact, wants to release as
Let me ask you, Dr.
Israeli
Haddad, may I ask you, what are the underlying political, military, and territorial strategies might the Israeli Defense Minister Katz's statement about controlling Gaza, like the West Bank, reflect? And how could it influence Israel's long-term policy towards Gaza and the broader Palestinian territories?
In fact, there is, of course, a strategy in Israel, which is the strategy of annexation of the West Bank, in addition to the annexation of the Gaza Strip. In fact, what Israel is doing right now, specifically in the Palestinian territories, is, the positioning of perpetual colonization. The Israelis want to recolonize the Gaza Strip, just as what's happening right now in the West Bank. In fact, there are military bases right now in the settlements, and the Israelis want to establish new bases in the Gaza Strip in order to further their colonizing positioning. And right now we see the A cities in the West Bank that are ruled by the Palestinian government. And in fact, what Israel wants is to control those as well. And this, in fact, negatively impacts the Palestinian reality and is going to hinder all attempts to reach a two-state resolution. And in fact, Israel wants to cancel out even the notion of a Palestinian state. And there is a lot of resistance inside Israel towards the establishment of a Palestinian independent, viable state. And for that matter, they keep on advancing their annexation practices, and it is projected that the Israelis are going to silently displace their populations into different cities inside of Palestine. And even if
let me, Dr. Haddad, move on to let me ask you, in the light of the escalating military actions and rising tensions, what are the broader implications for the prospects of a ceasefire or maybe a sustainable political resolution in Gaza? And what role can international actors play in influencing these outcomes?
There is more than one front that is trying to reach an agreement or even a humanitarian 45-day truce or respite. In fact, we have the American administration represented by Biden and President-elect Donald Trump. Trump, in fact, before he comes to power officially on the 20th of January, he wants to sign or reach even a partial agreement. As well, we have Egypt, Qatar, and all neighboring countries. They are all mobilizing their efforts in order to terminate and halt the war in Palestine. But still, there are some challenges looming in the horizon. However, there are some positive indicators regarding reaching a truce or a respite. For instance, the number of Israeli hostages released by Palestine, but we don't know about the Palestinian hostages that have recently been detained, whether they are going to be released as well. As well, we have other challenges relating to what they call the next
was from
day.
Ramallah, Dr. Tamara Haddad, the writer and political researcher. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Haddad, for your insights. And we're back to you again, Rana.
Thank you so much, Salma. And we move on with the occupation vehicles have targeted Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, causing a fire inside its intensive care unit. The hospital's director reported that Israeli occupation forces targeted nearby homes before attacking the hospital with gunfire and shelling. The intensive care unit, which is the only one in northern Gaza, was deliberately targeted, causing a fire that forced the evacuation of ventilator-dependent patients. It is now out of service, and the hospital is facing a severe water shortage. The World Health Organization says an international medical team urgently needed at Kamal Adwan Hospital has been blocked from deploying due to Israeli siege in northern Gaza. World Health Organization's regional director for the Mediterranean and Eastern Mediterranean reported and also condemned the repeated attacks on the medical facility. She wrote on X, "The fear endured by the hospital staff and patients in recent days is indescribable and unacceptable," adding that the hospital is without surgical or maternal care capacity. Several Palestinians have been killed and many others were injured in the occupation's bombing of various areas across the Gaza Strip. Palestinian media reported that the occupation forces targeted a tent housing displaced people in the city of Deir el-Balah, as well as another in Jabalia. They also targeted a park in Nusrayat camp in central Gaza. An Israeli fighter jet has targeted a house in Beit Hanun, killing 4 Palestinians and injuring several others. Palestinian media reported that the fighter jet also fired towards areas of Zaytun neighborhood in Gaza City and towards the El Janina neighborhood east of Palestine city of Rafah. 3 Palestinians have been killed and others were injured in an Israeli airstrike that targeted a house in Qnews in southern Gaza, where Israeli occupation forces have been committing genocide for over 40 months. In addition, the occupation army has issued evacuation orders to several blocks in Burej camp in central Gaza. Gaza-based health authorities have confirmed that the Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October the 7th has risen to over 45,000, with over 107,000 injuries. They also added that the Israeli occupation forces committed 3 massacres against families in Gaza over the past 24 hours, killing at least 38 Palestinians and injuring 203 others. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has taken the stand in his long-running corruption trial for the second time this week. Netanyahu arrived with his lawyer after he was ordered to testify 3 times a week regarding a 2019 indictment in 3 cases involving gifts from millionaires' friends and his alleged seeking of the regular favors for media tycoons in return for favorable new coverages. He has denied any wrongdoing and has pleaded not guilty. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has stressed the need for a political solution to the Israel-Hamas conflict. Speaking at a New York City event, Sullivan noted that the U.S. government has never been satisfied with its efforts and always wants to be pushing for more in war zones like Gaza. Sullivan warned that without a political solution, Gaza's population could become radicalized, leaving nothing to work with going forward.
Are not being put in a position.
According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Israeli forces have advanced 9 kilometers deep into the countryside of Daraa in southern Syria. The observatory said Israeli forces entered the village of Kuya and the Wahda Dam near the Syrian-Jordanian border and are stationed in strategic locations. They have warned residents to surrender weapons. It also reported that Israeli forces entered the Battalion 74 near Saida on the border between the provinces of Daraa and Qantira, marking a new incursion into southern Syria. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israeli forces will stay in a buffer zone on the Syrian border until another arrangement is in place that ensures Israel's security. Israel pleaded to double its population on the occupied Golan Heights and said threats from Syria remain despite the moderate tone of leaders who ousted President Bashar al-Assad a week ago. The head of the Syrian National Coalition, Hadi al-Bahra, has called for Syrians to unite behind a shared vision for the country's recovery. Al-Bahra urged national support for the caretaker government until a transitional body is established in March 2025. He outlined a roadmap for political transition, calling for a credible, inclusive government that avoids any sectorism and excludes no political factions. The United Nations Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, has called for free and fair elections and humanitarian assistance for Syria. Addressing reporters in Damascus, Pedersen expressed hope for a political solution in the northeast after al-Assad was ousted this month.
The needs are immense and could only be addressed with broad support.
Damascus International Airport has reopened for the first time since Syria's President Bashar al-Assad was ousted by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS. The first domestic flight departed from Damascus International Airport bound from Aleppo. The opening came as the UN envoy told the Security Council that the country needs to receive the economic support it needs. Syria's main seaport in the coastal city of Latakia has returned to work after rebuilding following Israeli airstrikes. At one end of the port, workers repaired the ship while trucks picked up containers at the other. The Syrian Navy section was hit by Israeli airstrikes last week, with several destroyed vessels still half submerged. Syrians have lined up outside banks in Damascus, attempting to access their money. Public sector's employees who queued in front of ATM machines said they couldn't withdraw their salaries. They have been withheld in banks since Bashar al-Assad was ousted as president. Syria's new government says it will raise wages and prioritize improving services. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has said more than 880,000 people have been displaced since the escalation of hostilities in Syria. The OCHA reiterated in its report that those fleeing fighting in Syria must be allowed to do so safely and to voluntarily return when the situation allows, and that displaced people must be protected and able to access the essentials for their survival. The office also reported that the UN and partners will continue to help the displaced people by supplying food, water, cash, tents, blankets, and necessary medical supplies. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said Russia can definitely work with the administration of Donald Trump after he is sworn in as the United States President next month. He also reiterated accusations by Moscow that reckless actions by the West has raised the risk of nuclear war and described the global security situation as depressing. He also said that Russia wanted to reduce the potential for conflict. President Vladimir Putin said last month that Trump's comments about ending the war in Ukraine were deserving of attention. The Kremlin has stated that Russian intelligence services know who ordered the killing of top Russian General Igor Kirillov. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Ukraine is using the methods of terrorists. Lieutenant General Krikov, who was the chief of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical protection troops, was killed in Moscow on Tuesday. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we have been covering. Palestinians' permanent observer to the United Nations calls for immediate action for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli forces advanced 9 kilometers deep into the countryside of Daraa in southern Syria. And Russia says it can work with the administration of Donald Trump after he is sworn in as US President next month. This concludes the news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.